Now, without further ado, the moment we've been waiting for, we're welcoming Dr. Nhlanla Thwala to give us an opening address. He's an educator who's passionate about empowering the next generation of leaders. Some of you already know him as the provost for ALU, and some of you know him as the dean for the ALU-SB. So I invite to the floor Dr. Nhlanla Thwala.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm really honored to be here with you today, and it's an exciting event. And you know, the topics that are up for discussion today are very dear to my heart. But before I go to that, let me welcome all of you and also welcome all the guests who are participating in this conference, either as panelists or as guest speakers. We welcome you at ALU, and we hope that you know, you will have an engaging time, and we will, you know, grapple with all the issues that have to do with digitization, as well as Africa's space in the online world. I would like to just maybe spend about 5 minutes or so talking about key ideas that I would like to share with you on the concept of Africa education and the digital space, and what promises to be a great future for us in Africa in view of where Africa is and what the promise of the digital space as well as online learning looks like. The comments I would like to make are along the lines of how online technologies will help Africa achieve what I would like to call Dewey's democratic education ideals. You know, and the question will be, who is Dewey? Dewey is a philosopher who wrote extensively about education. And for most of the past few hundreds of years, the ideas he propounded and the ideas he put forward remained really not achievable, because what he proposed was far ahead of his time. And I would like to just speak a little bit about some of the ideas that he presented and why they hold so much promise for us at this particular time. I will focus mostly on the promise of this space in education. One of the key themes of Dewey's education philosophy was experiential learning. We talk about experiential learning now at ALU. This is an idea that has been in the works for a long time. And it was one of Dewey's key ideas that education or learning must be experiential in order for it to be meaningful. And that it must be married by, you know, reflection of the experience. Secondly, one of his key themes is students' interests and their aptitudes to drive learning. In other words, learning is best achieved if someone is really engaged. It's along the lines of their interests and their aptitudes. The third element of Dewey's philosophy of education was contextual or relevant learning. In other words, what are you learning it for, and what is the context of your learning? The other one was links to theory and practice, and vice versa. In other words, you have to link practice to theory, reflect about it, and then the theory itself must then be proven by theory. And lastly, that students gradually take charge of their own learning, that the teacher or the facilitator must not be the crutch upon which students lean. Students must take charge of their own learning. We call this now self-directed learning. So all of these ideas were shared with us by Dewey many, many years ago. Now, if we look at the current construction of education, and I'm generalizing here because it's not the same everywhere, is that education is limited to space and infrastructure. It's constrained by space and infrastructure. In other words, you have to send a student to a particular space, and you have to send faculty and teachers to a particular space. Admin also go to that space. The infrastructure is there for learning, and everybody goes to a particular space in order to learn. The construction of education now as well is curriculum, and it's driven by the curriculum, and it is paced. So what you find is that it's a uniform curriculum for all kinds of students. Whatever they want to learn, it's a uniform curriculum, which is pre-baked for them. And it's also instructor-led and curriculum-led. In other words, you don't deviate from the curriculum, and the instructor is the leader of the learning. It's also paced learning. In other words, you have to match at the same pace, okay? So when you start a term, there are certain weeks that you are given, you have to finish the curriculum. So it's almost like a factory model. You have to match at the same level. And it's all graded. There's grade 1, there's grade 2, there's year 1, there's year 2, there's year 3. All of these levels of education and the pacing are the artifacts of what we see in education today. And then when we look at the outcomes of education today, they are characterized by low motivation levels among students, right? Some students, and I'm sure most of you ALU students, are highly motivated, but the general norm is that students are lowly motivated by what they're studying because they can't make it, they can't link what they are learning to what they want to do. Then there's poor knowledge, skills, and competencies attainment. In other words, there is, babysitting, I call it. You go to school, you do what you're supposed to do, but the retention of knowledge, skills, and competencies is low. And one of the other features is that it's unscalable. The reach of education in these days is limited by the infrastructure. So for most of us, the reality is that if you want a tertiary institution, you have to migrate from wherever you are to where the tertiary institution is, and normally from rural to urban spaces. And I'd like to add that the construction of current education is focused on the wrong outcomes. It says that you are going to school in order to get a job. But what nobody tells you is that there are no jobs. Okay, so your aim is to get a job just in case someone dies, or to get a job just in case someone starts a new business. So it's not necessarily creating people who are supposed to create jobs and add to the expansive side of the economy. It's supposed to make you fit into a cog, what my son calls a spare part business. Education is a spare part business. If you are a wheel, you are made, you stay in line and waiting to be fitted to a particular car. Now, what exactly are Africa's education needs? What are Africa's tertiary needs? Let me just paint a picture in a minute. Ideally, we want to increase significantly the number of people who can access higher education. At present, okay, less than 5% of school leavers access tertiary education. 5%, less in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, okay? That is too low for what we need. We should be sitting closer to 30% in order to be producing skills that are necessary for economic development. And the education outcomes focus needs to change from theory to productive education relevant to the socio-economic needs of our societies and individuals as well. So this is the context of what we need vis-a-vis what we're getting. I would like to thank COVID. I know that most of us think of COVID as something that has been detrimental, but COVID has done something wonderful. It has taken away the spatial education model foundations. In other words, COVID simply said, you can't come and learn in one space together. You have to socially distance. So you have to learn in a socially distanced way. But whether you're socially distanced in a room or in different parts of the world, it no longer matters. Okay, so that is the one thing that COVID has done. And this, in my opinion, has opened an opportunity for us to look at education in a different way and ask the question, how could we do this better in order to better meet our needs? Now, we know what is desirable, okay? We know that we need experiential learning in one's own environment in order to make education useful. We also know that learning based on student aptitudes and interests is best. We also know that education has to be lifelong learning. It has to be self-directed. It has to be self-paced because it's your education. It's not anybody's education. Okay. So those are the things that we know, and here at ALU, you have heard us talk about this. Those are the elements that we think should characterize our education going forward. And the inception of COVID, and looking also at technologies that are available to us means that we can now engage with this question in a meaningful way. In other words, how can we leverage online learning in order to achieve all of these things that Dewey specified a long time ago, which have not been practicable? What can we now do by leveraging online and local resources and student motivation to achieve a better education? One of them is that in terms of space and infrastructure, learning is no longer needs to be tied to space, infrastructure for certain forms of study. I do acknowledge that there are some forms of study that require those special needs. Maybe you have to play with an engine, or you have to train in medicine. There may be a need. But for some of our education, space is no longer the constraint, or infrastructure is no longer the constraint. Credible online resources are now available at a fraction of the current cost. Remember that one of the biggest problems with education as constructed currently is that it's very expensive. You have to migrate from whatever rural area you live in order to be closer to education. You incur cost of living closer to the institution. In other words, you incur costs that have nothing to do with the education itself, but to be proximate to education. The whole local environment can now be leveraged to advance learning. In other words, what you need to learn should be immediate to you so that it can be applied. Okay, this is what we can do. Curriculum and spacing. We need to drop the predetermined curriculum and switch to a co-created curriculum with our students. In other words, it's the student who says, I want to learn for this purpose. And us as experts and as facilitators, as you say, how can we create a journey for you of learning that will serve your need? And online tools make this very easy these days because we can do that. We can curate learning resources and tasks to fit the student's need and desire to learn. And then also learning at the pace of the student. After all, it's their education. Why do you have to finish the education at a predetermined time? One of the things that has always fascinated me about education is this. One student takes, at the end of the term, gets 30%. And then when they come back and do a research, we tell them we'll keep their grade at 60% or 50%. What is the logic? Well, we want to be fair to the students who only got less time and you got more time. But what are we assessing? Are we assessing your competence or are we assessing the time? I don't know. These are some of the things that have always frustrated me. Focus on competencies versus vis-a-vis grades. What people can do matters more than the grades. Now, in terms of the outcomes, evidence of applied knowledge in portfolios of outputs is more important. These are the things we want to see. Can you do something with it? Okay. And in those outputs, we may have reflection portfolios. And then other outcomes that we want of education is a rich network of coaches, mentors, supervisors, and collaborators. Okay. Of course, we want the outcomes to be scalable. In other words, an education that can meet the needs of many more students than we currently have. If we no longer have infrastructure as a constraint, all we need to have is connectivity and a gadget in front of a student for them to learn. They have an environment in which they can apply their knowledge, so scalability is now possible. Education should no longer be a spare part business. You should not be learning in order to fit into a job. You should learn in order to self-actualize, create a job, solve problems, and be meaningful in your own right. I would like to end this presentation by just saying, we still believe that ALU is the best environment for us to be a transformational experience. You come in as a student, we sit down with you, and we ask, what do you want to learn? And that experience transforms you. You are not just going to learn in our campus, you are going to learn in the whole world around you. And when you graduate, You better show your competencies, skills, and proficiencies as opposed to showing grades. To summarize, we embrace the future. Okay? The future coming with technology is something that we would like to embrace. Leverage technology in order to reach our goals. Guided by Jewish philosophy of education, which has long been a dream, we can now achieve it because we can now leverage technology. We can leverage motivation of students. We can leverage facilitators, mentors, and coaches to achieve personalized learning. We see online resources as a critical ingredient in mapping more fit-for-purpose education landscape in Africa than before. We endeavor to move away from prepackaged education approach. In other words, the curriculum cannot be determined in your absence. The curriculum must be determined with you so that we don't have a uniform curriculum. After all, people don't want to use education the same way. Their objectives in life are not the same, and the learning pace is not the same. So we would like to see that plurality. We're still committed to a university education that is transformative for the individual so that that individual can be a meaningful member of society. I would like to end by saying that digitization of the new frontier is something that we embrace. Africa is open for innovation. We are here, and yes, we can. Long before Obama stole the slogan, it belonged to Bob the Builder, and I used to read it to my children. Thank you very much.